The thing we all heard about Spider-Man for the PS4 was how it would make us feel like Spider-Man, and the game definitely delivered, but in more ways than simply letting you swing through a gorgeous rendition of New York and into some spectacular set pieces. Instead, developer Insomniac captured this feeling through something a bit deeper, a bit less obvious, by delving into the relationship between Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And of course, this video is going to spoil the hell out of this game, so buckle in. Spider-Man's still quite unique among superheroes. Unlike many of Marvel's other characters, especially in the cinematic universe, Peter Parker's secret identity is an integral part of his story, and how he balances life between being Peter and being Spider-Man. He's often called the relatable superhero, but what exactly does that mean? Simply put, Peter has always been designed to capture normalcy, making him the only superhero who still has to worry about making it to work on time, or paying his rent, or even just keeping up social plans. Normal concerns are always an integral part of Spider-Man's life, and so his best stories often play up that aspect in contrast to the bigger scale stakes. According to lead writer of the game, John Paquette, whenever Peter wins, Spider-Man loses. Whenever Spider-Man wins, Peter loses. And I think this tells you a lot about the type of story Insomniac SpiderMan decides to tell. It does so by putting its time into building relationships with the people in Peter's life, and how they affect both him and Spider-Man. The most obvious of these is Mary Jane, and she plays one of the biggest roles in the game in a way that she has rarely been used before in Spider-Man history. MJ's relationship to Peter is a fantastic way to explore how he tries to keep his two lives separate, and it's one of the main things that kept me hooked throughout the story. By the time the game begins, Peter and MJ have dated, broken up, and she's fully aware of his dual life. This iteration of MJ is a reporter for the Daily Bugle, becoming a bit of a Lois Lane type, but this is a great way to give her a lot more agency in the story than the character normally receives, and in turn, serves the overall narrative in a much more thematic way. We learn that their relationship fell apart because of how much Peter tried to keep her away from his life as Spider-Man, and making Mary Jane a reporter gives this aspect of the dynamic more weight, as she has her own drive to work alongside him, not to simply be his damsel in distress.
You know the closer you get to them, the more you become a target, right?
The closer I get, the better chance we have to stop them.
This is an obvious struggle for Peter, and it's easy enough to understand why. For someone with superpowers, it would be natural to feel like those around him are fragile in comparison, and to feel the need to protect them. But how can it not be frustrating for her in turn? She has her own needs and wants, and she doesn't need to be treated like glass. As we see throughout the story, Peter and Mary Jane cannot be together until he accepts her as an equal, as a partner, and so an aspect of Peter's journey is therefore learning that Mary Jane and those important to him can take care of themselves, and that he has to let her fully into his life with no half measures.
It's just hard being the one who always gets saved, you know? Sometimes I want to do the saving.
I'm sorry I made you feel like you couldn't. Still partners?
Always.
Their relationship at the heart of the story leads to one of my favourite moments from the game, around halfway through when Mr. Negative has been defeated by Spider-Man for the first time, the texting scene. This scene combines the humanity of Peter Parker and the spectacular nature of Spider-Man in a basically perfect way. Here we have a superhero in full costume, coming off the victory of defeating a dangerous supervillain and doing all of his superpowered things, like hanging and swinging around a rooftop and walking up the side of walls like it's no issue. And yet, it's so awkward, especially in the quickly repeated text of Peter trying to smooth things over, or the way he reacts to each new message as he painfully has to wait for the next one.
Please say no, please say no. Okay. And not okay.
It feels like a real moment, dressed up in spandex, and that's kind of what Spider-Man is all about. As well as Mary Jane though, you have a whole cast of people who influence the story, like Aunt May, Miles Morales, Martin Lee and Otto Octavius, all of whom impact Peter in his personal life, but also do so as Spider-Man. It's never simply one or the other, and it makes every one of these characters just that little bit more complicated. For example, the player has a connection to Martin Lee before he is revealed to be Mr. Negative, as he runs the shelter where Aunt May and Peter both help out. Mr. Negative is then responsible for Miles' father's death, which is why Peter feels the need to look out for Miles. So by the time we have to confront Mr. Negative, we are doing it from the perspective of Spider-Man and as Peter Parker, We see the supervillain who killed Jefferson Davis and cost Miles his father, but also the man who runs the homeless shelter and helps people in need. We get this much development in this dynamic, and Lee isn't even the main villain. That honour goes to Otto Octavius, and his connection to Peter is one of the most important parts of both Peter's and Spider-Man's story. In this interpretation of the Spider mythos, Otto is Peter's mentor, idol, and friend, and we see clearly through their interactions just how much Peter respects this man, even in contrast to Norman Osborn, Otto's former partner. Osborn may be the more successful of the two, having become mayor of New York, but Peter believes in Otto.
Because I still haven't found another job.
My funds are still...
I know. It's okay. Don't worry, I'll figure it out. What's a few bucks when you're trying to change the world, right?
to changing the world.
Which is why it hurts so much when he descends into villainy, and Peter is unable to stop it, adding a level of failure to all of his other burdens. And so, like Martin Lee, Doc Ock is a supervillain whose human side is known by the player, adding a sharp contrast to who he was and who he has become. More than a good villain, it makes him a good character, one who we have seen change and one who we understand. Through Peter, we got to see and understand his motives, his rage against Norman Osborn, and his fear as worsening neurological disease. Otto Octavius is a tragic character, and one we would never have gotten if we hadn't known him as Peter Parker first. We also would never have gotten the absolutely incredible, emotional final confrontation. Gameplay wise, the final fight is nothing particularly different, doesn't stand out all that much from the other big villain fights of the game. But it's the moment where Peter realizes,
You knew? I tried to warn you, Peter.
Up until this point, we were under the impression that Doc Ock was only after Spider-Man, understandably as he was a threat to his plans for revenge against Osborn. But this is when everything changes for Peter, and how we as the player see Octavius. Peter was like a son to him, yet he knew all along that he was trying to kill Peter as well as Spider-Man, and it changed nothing. As well as Peter's sense of failure towards Otto, he now feels betrayal as well, and we see Spider-Man angrier than we've ever seen him. It kills whatever hope of redemption that may have been left for Otto, and this is the moment that elevates the climax of this game to something truly powerful, as we, the player, feel Spider-Man's rage and his pain when he is forced to truly fight the father figure he thought he had, and that he now has lost.
Peter, I saw you as a son. I should have known you'd turn on me, just like all the others.
Turn. I've worshipped you. Your mind, your conscience, wanting to help others.
Spider-Man's best villains have often been the ones that he has the most connection to, like Green Goblin, his best friend's father, or Eddie Brock, who becomes Venom only because of Peter's own actions. Sam Raimi's acclaimed Spider-Man 2 saw Peter meeting and getting to know Doc Ock before he became a supervillain, a development that presumably became inspiration for this game's own take on the character. And, spoiler warning, Spider-Man Homecoming had the fantastic twist of the Vulture being Liz Allen's father, and led to one of the film's best scenes, where Peter is very much caught between his two worlds, put in a position where choosing one means ruin for the other. And this echoes one of the final scenes of Insomniac SpiderMan, where Peter has to make the final choice on whether to use the cure to save Aunt May, or keep it so that the rest of the infected can be saved. If the theme of the game is that Peter Parker and Spider-Man cannot exist separately of each other, and that each will always affect the other in some way, then this scene is the ultimate culmination of that. Like with his relationship with Mary Jane or with Otto, Peter doesn't get to pick and choose which side of his life he lets people into. Even in the last minutes, he still tries to hide his secret.
You're gonna be okay, ma'am. I've got the cure right here.
But May calls him out.
Take off your mask. I want to see my nephew.
And the scene delivers a brilliant and emotional contrast to Doc Ock knowing his secret. A wholly different delivery and meaning of,
You knew?
it may be painful, but he has to learn to let Peter Parker and Spider-Man coexist. And we see him beginning to, as he rekindles a relationship with Mary Jane and comfortably reveals his powers to Miles, who now also has spider powers and is probably in need of a mentor. This last moment is a crucial part of the game's take on Peter's development, showing him being totally open to letting Miles know both sides of him. Plenty of other superheroes have people important to them, of course, but compared to Spider-Man, they are usually much more part of the superhero world, not civilians as it were. In contrast, no matter what iteration, Peter is constantly trying to keep his friends and family away from Spider-Man as much as possible, and only lets them in when he's caught red-handed or when it's absolutely necessary.
What the?
Even then, he tries to keep them a certain distance, as we see with Mary Jane in this game. But Insomniac SpiderMan takes this and makes it one of its central themes, a way to push both sides of the character. In one sense, it may make the world of Spider-Man seem a little smaller, but it also makes every other person in it that bit more interesting and a bit more complicated. And beyond that, it does the same for its hero, forcing Peter and Spider-Man to collide and learn how to coexist. Even more than swinging through the incredible city that is New York, this is what it must feel like to be Spider-Man. Thanks for watching. What did you think of Insomniac Spider-Man? Let us know in the comments, maybe hit that red button, you know the one, and see you next time.